My lecture notes are broken down into two major sections. One are dimensions of effective listening, and the other are obstacles of listening. Now, when I mention or talk about dimensions of effective listening, and I'm comparing and contrasting active listening, passive listening, critical, non-judgmental, depth level, surface level. Actually, a good image to keep in mind is like a seesaw or a teeter-totter, right? Opposite ends. These are both on the same spectrum of listening. They're just opposite ends. And these all tend to be fairly good methods of listening and things we need to build into our lifestyle. So active and passive is mentioned fairly well in the textbook. I just had to get my remote to work. Empathic and objective, there's also some information on that. Remember, empathy, empathic listening to connect with our feelings, sort of get into the other person's world. Whereas objective listening is sort of to separate yourself from the other person and not be emotionally involved in trying to understand the message. Non-judgmental and critical listening. Non-judgmental just says, let me suspend my own beliefs and values and maybe how I feel about the other person or what they're saying, and just to sort of go for comprehension, to withhold judgment. And critical listening is just the opposite. Now, we're on the seesaw. Opposite end, still good listening. Critical listening says, how do I feel about this message? Do I agree with it? Do I think this is a good idea? Do I like this? And so this is where you go from listening and you process it, and you make a judgment and idea, and you're really interacting with the other person. So that's sort of what's going on with those two. Our last dimension of effective listening, surface level and depth level listening. So surface level, before we jump into it, think of like a swimming pool, a pond, a lake. Surface level is the top, and then depth level we're going right below the surface. So surface level is literal listening. So if you're meeting a friend for lunch and you sit down, you have your food, you're beginning the conversation, you might say something like, so how's your week going? How are you doing? How's your day going? Are you okay? And your friend says, yeah, everything's fine, I'm doing well. Okay, so that message, everything's fine, I'm doing well, if we took a surface level sort of approach to that, literal listening, we would go, okay, everything's fine with my friend. They said everything's fine, everything's well. If we did a depth level listening, we would look for like nonverbal cues. What's going on with their shoulders? What about the eyes? And what about paralanguage, the pitch and rate and tone of their voice? Everything's fine, I'm doing well, and maybe they're not looking at you. Then you know, hey, I don't need to literal listen. I need to go below the surface and sort of probe what's going on. Now, sometimes what people say on the surface, the literal, that's really how they feel. So the whole idea behind these is just to sort of balance them out and to choose which one to use in the moment. I really want to spend the majority of our time in this mini lecture focusing on the obstacles or the barriers. What are the things that get in the way? What are the things that really hinder us from being good listeners? And it seems like maybe of all the communication traits that we'll study in this class, I think listening is one of the most important ones. And we struggle with it because a lot of obstacles get in the way. Now, the first two obstacles, internal noise and external noise, we sort of hit on those in chapter 1. So we know there are things like daydreaming, or stress, or being distracted internally, or external things going on in the environment. Maybe you're on your phone and not paying attention to your friend, or you're in a noisy environment, distracted by cars or people. So we kind of get the idea behind those two. Assimilation, the third one. Assimilation is when you reinterpret a message that a friend is sending to you based on your own values and opinions of the message and the person. So let's say that, here's an example. This is a crazy example. Your grandmother thinks you're just the best thing ever, okay? She's always adored you since you were a baby to where you are now. And it is, let's say it's a Wednesday morning and she's still reading the newspaper. I think they still print newspapers. She's looking at the Houston Chronicle and she sees your name, right, plastered right there on the front page. Kelly, and I'm not going to call anyone in this class. Kelly, drug czar, captured, Lone Star student, was a drug czar, running drugs all through the city of Houston. Now, if your grandmother sees that, and her impression of, we'll say, her granddaughter Kelly has always been positive and great, this is way beyond halo effect, then she might look at that and go, oh, wow, I didn't know she was, selling drugs everywhere, but she has to pay for an education, and she's also probably taking care of some family members who need some help. So the grandmother would totally, right, assimilate that message to fit her worldview, her opinion of what that granddaughter is supposed to be like an angel. So you want to be careful of that. Another one that really connects to it is friend or foe factor. Now, the friend or foe factor really depends on your relationship with the other person. And if you like the person, they're a good friend, maybe a family member, someone you admire, you tend to give them a little bit better or a fair read than if you don't like them. So let's say that Cousin Joe, whom everyone in the family despises, that we do not like, Cousin Joe runs into the burning building, which happens to be a pet store, and rescues all the kittens and the puppies and snakes and fish and gets them all out, right? He should be a hero. So you're seeing this news report online and you're like, oh my gosh, Cousin Joe ran in and saved all these animals. But foe, right? No one likes Cousin Joe. So you might start saying things. You wouldn't say like, oh, he's a hero, he's a great guy. You might say things like, I bet he just did that to get on the news. Or what, I bet he set the place on fire and then staged the whole thing and rescued everyone. Have you ever seen something like that happen with a friend or foe? If we like the person, good positive interpretation. If we don't, negative interpretation. Hear what you expect. You want to be careful of this. We find the hear what you expect barrier with people that we're in long-term relationships with. And so you'll be sharing some news or some information with them, and you're already getting ready to respond to them based on what you think they're going to say rather than what they really say. So we want to be mindful of that one. Stage hogging and ambushing, 6 and 7. These are really poor listening behaviors that we want to avoid at all costs if possible. So I hope everyone knows what a stage hog is. They want to be in the limelight, on stage, center stage, all attention on them. So stage hogging is when you call up your friend and go, how are you doing with all this stay at home and we can't go out, and you're starting to talk about things going on in your life. You say, what, I did go out this weekend and we went and picked up some food. We went to a restaurant for takeout. And before you can finish your story, your friend might jump in and say, oh yeah, we went there last week. The food's pretty good. And then they tell you all about their experience. So they sort of co-op or just take over the conversation. That's stage hogging, pretending to listen but wanting to take over. Ambushing is also sort of pretending to listen, but you're just waiting to pounce on the other person. You're waiting to use information against them. We'll see ambushing happening in interpersonal conflicts. And so it's using people's messages against them. We want to be careful of that. We've got 3 left: selective listening, tuning out, and pseudo listening. So selective listening, only paying attention to those parts of the message that have value to you. So your parents go off somewhere on an anniversary trip. They come back and they want to show you all the pictures and videos, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the most boring thing ever. And then they go, oh, we brought back some souvenirs. You go, what? I'm sorry, what? What's that? Souvenirs? And so then, right, selective listening, you start paying attention to the parts that matter most to you. Kind of be careful with that one. Tuning out, this is sort of when we shut people out or don't pay attention to them it can be based on a lot of different things. Maybe we don't like the way that they're dressed or an accent. Maybe we don't like a political belief they're starting to share or a religious idea. And so we will shut the person down just based on something about them, verbal or nonverbal, something that we don't like. And then pseudo-listening. Pseudo-listening is, pseudo means fake or false, not real. So pseudo-listening is we're pretending to listen, but we're really not. I find that we tend to pseudo-listen more often than we should when we're on the phone. Have you ever had this happen? You're thinking, that's great. It's a good idea. And you're like changing channels on the TV or you're doing something else. And that's how we sort of pretend. We let people know, I'm paying attention, but we're really not. So those are some barriers we want to be really, I would say, keep our eyes open. Some behaviors we want to avoid: the ambushing, the selective listening. Definitely don't be a stage hog. And really, we want to just work on our listening skills to try to be the best communicator and connector that we can be. Okay, guys, we're out of time for now. Let me know if you have any questions.